This episode is for you if you influence or manage communications and marketing for any kind of social impact organization. It might be a nonprofit, a foundation, a corporate giving arm. And the reality is, as a professional, you have heard that you should quote unquote be on LinkedIn. I know you know it's good for you. I think about it like eating your vegetables. We all know we're supposed to be on LinkedIn. We know we're supposed to get our kale and our carrots, but especially with LinkedIn, like time is limited. There's only so many hours in a work week. And so when you decide to do something marketing wise, you're effectively deciding not to try another channel, right? You're effectively deciding not to do something else. So you've got to make a strategic case for it. So in this episode, I'm going to share 10 specific case uses for LinkedIn as a social impact communicator. So hopefully this will give you some ideas of not only what you should do when you get on LinkedIn, but why you should do it. So enjoy this episode. Hey, I'm Tania Bhattacharyya, and you are listening to the Campfire Circle podcast. We are all about breaking down the boardroom table as the ultimate space of leadership, and instead replacing it with a campfire, because that's where we share our stories. That's where we build warm community, and that is where there's always room. I'm building an impactful business in public through thought leadership, and I'm taking you behind the scenes all along the way. So if you want to stand out as you stand up for your mission, you are in the right place. Okay, so let's get into it with number one, which is finding the right board members and volunteers to drive your organization forward. So LinkedIn is a goldmine for connecting with passionate individuals who are willing to lend their skills and their expertise. And often they're looking for ways to lend their skills and expertise. So LinkedIn has a 9 million plus person network of searchable professionals that spans all industries, all locations, all passions, like all of the different things that you might be looking for. And because you can search on LinkedIn and then filter it down, you can zero on people with the very specific backgrounds and experiences and values that aligns with yours. So no, you can't search for a specific value, right? But you can search for things like, who are they connected to? Who are they following? Where do they work? What companies do they work for or have they worked for? Where did they go to school? All these kinds of things. And I'll give you an example to make it a little bit more clear. So before I became a consultant, I worked in the nonprofit world. And so for 12 years, I worked in the addiction treatment space. And the organization I worked for, we happened to serve a lot of pilots. And so we wanted to connect with influential people in the aviation industry who could help us do things like speak at aligned conferences and events for pilots or people in that field, or connect us with case managers at the FAA, or help us build relationships and work towards getting contracts with different major airlines to be able to serve their impaired professionals. And so the list goes on. Like when you have a specific specialty or niche or skill set at your organization, there's always value in connecting with more people and movers and shakers in that industry. And so we use LinkedIn to find some of those connectors. And I mentioned some of the different filtering options, like you can search it not just by location or where they work, but you can filter it down based on people who have actually self-selected and said, yes, I am interested in providing pro bono or volunteer support, or yes, I want to join a nonprofit board. That's a filter option under the filters of LinkedIn's search. And no, you don't need a LinkedIn premium account, although I believe there are some limitation in terms of like numbers of searches you can do. But especially if you're just getting started with searching on LinkedIn, like you don't need a premium account to be able to do this. And yes, if you open up LinkedIn, I'm talking about that search bar at the very top that you see on LinkedIn. That is like a gateway to the 9 million professionals that are on LinkedIn that you might want to reach, right? You can search it, you can filter it, and you should to find these new partners for your organization. So number two is a little bit of a different side of the same coin, which is communicating with existing donors. So I talked about finding new people just now. Now let's talk about communicating with the people you're already networked with. So a lot of us probably think of LinkedIn as a place to almost use it like a megaphone to yell into the crowd. It's like a one-to-many communication tool. And sure, it can be that, but it is just as helpful, and in some cases, even more helpful, to think of it as a one-to-one platform where individually direct messaging people like corporate donors, past supporters, reporters, thought leaders, partners, because sometimes just getting a hold of these like really busy decision makers, people who hold the keys to major opportunities and partnerships, just trying to get a hold of them, even if we already know them, can feel like trying to get through to Fort Knox because they are gate kept. It's just like a nature of the beast. They have people that are responsible for filtering through their email, all these kinds of things. But on LinkedIn, you can send a DM to someone you're connected with. Or you could invest in premium to send what's called an in-mail to people you're not yet connected to. And I know that might seem a little strange. Am I really going to slide in this person's DMs? Like I just saw them on the news. Like, and I get that thought pattern, but I think you should, because while an executive assistant might take care of someone's email or voicemail or all these other ways of getting a hold of someone, oftentimes decision makers manage their own LinkedIn profile. Not always, but often. And they do engage directly with their network. And so vice versa, it's also a way for you to hear from people that you've worked with from years gone by. It's just a way to stay in touch one-on-one. And because on LinkedIn, your business identity is attached to your profile, it creates legitimacy. You're not, this influential person is not getting a message from Backstreet Boys fan 1997. It's like your name, it's your headshot, it's your organization's company, it's your logo, like it's verifiable. So it lends itself to a different way of communicating with people you really want to connect with and touch. Okay, so numbers 3, 4, and 5, I'm going to talk about together and I'll explain why. So number 3, researching individuals of interest. And that could be potential funders, grantee partners, individuals of interest. Let's just call it that. Number 4 is getting on grant makers or partners' radar. And number 5 is building corporate sponsorships and partnerships, corporate partnerships. So I looped all these together because I would summarize this under the umbrella of being seen and seeing others. And yes, there are databases, there are ways to search for funding opportunities, that all exists. But again, LinkedIn is a repository of personal and professional data. Like on LinkedIn, we're able to find out more information about people in a way that gives us a complete picture of who they are, like what they're interested in, who they're connected to, where they already donate, what are their philanthropic affiliations already, where do they go to school, where do they used to work, where are they speaking? All of these kinds of things will support our relationship cultivation. Like we are able to more holistically get to know someone that we are entering into partnership with, even before we have that first call. What are they proud of? Who do they trust? Who are our mutual connections? It has that info that helps us build those stronger relationships in a way more natural and easy way. And so for the folks who are seeking funding, standing out and getting noticed by funders can feel daunting. There's a lot of noise, it's et cetera, et cetera. But LinkedIn offers that opportunity to connect with grant makers and CSR reps because, again, board members, program officers, living donors, families of family foundations, CSR representatives, funders do maintain active profiles on LinkedIn. And no, they probably aren't logging on every day. They're probably not sharing their own content. Maybe they are. Statistically, they're probably in the 93% of LinkedIn users who don't really share content, but that doesn't mean they're not periodically logging on. And it doesn't mean they're not reachable on there. Also, if you are collaborating with a coalition of like-missioned organizations, which I know you probably are, sharing content about your collaborations and your collective impact can put you in front of your colleagues' funders, right? And vice versa. It's a good thing for everyone to be talking about your partnerships and, lifting all of you all together at the same time. And then for grant makers, really, it's just the other side of the same coin. In this era, brand is important. Brand identity is important. Who you are matters. Your why matters. And so for grant makers and for those who are funders, LinkedIn is it's just a great place to highlight your grantees, introduce grantees to each other, talk about the good work that you're doing, build your brand, just by telling the stories of your work, right? Telling your stories. It's a great place to do that. So number 6 is amplifying your executives as trusted thought leaders or executive visibility. So earlier this year, the Communications Network put out a survey. And in that survey, in that research, we saw that by a huge margin, LinkedIn is the top social media platform in the social impact sector. 74% of social impact communicators use LinkedIn to amplify their mission. And so it follows that it's the right platform to raise the profile of your people by amplifying them as go-to voices and key figures who are ahead of the curve, who have their finger on the pulse, who are like ahead of the narrative, they're on top of the trends, all those kinds of things. Twitter or X has traditionally been a really important place to do this, but that platform is changing, has changed, et cetera. And there's other platforms that are emerging to replace it. And LinkedIn it's been around for 22 years. And so I think that's all we have to say about that. We all understand theoretically that everyone in your organization is a communicator, not just the comms team. But this puts that thought into practice in a very real way. Because on LinkedIn, your colleagues can tell the story of your organization better than your comms shop can. Truly. And the reason for that is because their voices travel further than your organizational page. So LinkedIn for Nonprofits is a great resource if they have a ton of information. But I found out on there that the average medium-sized nonprofit has roughly 3,000 followers. And that kind of fits as I think about clients, nonprofits I follow, as I just think about a general nonprofit, on average, a couple thousand followers is about right. But if you have a team of 50 people, and each of those 50 people have 500 followers on their individual LinkedIn profile, which is not a crazy amount to have, right? That's 25,000 people in that collective sphere of influence, right? So think about how much greater of a reach that is than your organizational page. So even if 5 or 6 or 7 of those 50 people, even if a small amount of your team actively shares their stories and their perspectives about their work in the world, you're collectively reaching a similar number of people or more, but there's even more natural trust built there because it's shared as a person. It's shared human to human. It's just far more effective than shouting from an organizational page. Yeah. So that's that. But then there's a segue into the next one. So the next one, number 7, is building team camaraderie and culture. And so, yes, it's a good thing when your team members share on LinkedIn. It's a good thing for your organization. It's a good thing for your mission. But it's a good thing for your culture too, and your recruitment and your retention. Because when your people show up on LinkedIn, and I say people, it could be your staff, it could be your board, it could be your volunteers, it could be your close partners, your fans. It's a place to publicly repost and share achievements and milestones and what's going on. And it boosts morale. It creates team pride. It's a way to learn more about your colleagues and their why as they share about what's important to them beyond the confines of their job title. It would be a dream come true if even 75% or 80% of your staff did these thoughtful reflections on LinkedIn. That's probably not going to happen. And you don't need all of them to. If a few people do it, it will have huge impact. And even if people just repost what your CEO is sharing or what your organizational page is sharing, that's huge. And so these wins, these celebrations, instead of just going into an internal newsletter, those pieces of news, when they're on LinkedIn, it goes beyond your 4 walls of your organization, but goes into your larger ecosystem as well. It gets acknowledged by colleagues who are external too. And so when some of your leadership, at least, is visible and reflective and sharing what makes them tick on LinkedIn, it's going to make talent want to work for you. It's going to position your organization as a place where it feels good to work for. It's going to make your existing team want to stay. And that is priceless. That's everything. That's everything. So, all right. So number 8, and there's not really an order to this, so just know that. Number 8 is breaking down stigma. And if you work in the social impact space, you likely work for something that is at least somewhat misunderstood, because otherwise there would be plenty of funding and you'd work yourself out of a job, because the issue would be fixed. And so there's some misunderstanding about your issue somewhere, some way. And so storytelling is an evidence-based strategy to combat the stigma. And as I mentioned before, I used to work in the nonprofit space at an addiction treatment program, especially with moms and pregnant and parenting women. And so changing perception was very important to us. Breaking down stigma was a big part of our mission, wasn't just a marketing thing, it was a big part of our mission. And so sharing stories or partnering with local business owners and key influencers in our community who are in recovery really helped us accomplish this mission in bite-sized pieces. So for example, I remember we invited a local, very respected, very well-known, very beloved business owner. She's a restaurateur. She owns many restaurants actually all over the country. And one of the first ones was here in Orange County where I live. And we invited her to share her recovery story with our patients. And she's also somebody who's very active on LinkedIn. She ended up being very gracious and inviting our patients to her restaurant when it was closed. It was just us, and served them afternoon tea. It was like a really lovely event. And so with permission, obviously, we shared that story on LinkedIn, and that showed up in her many followers' feeds. And I can't prove this necessarily, but I trust and believe that it just started to change the ways that some of those people thought about moms and addiction and women and addiction and substance use disorder. It was showing up on LinkedIn, which is a place they maybe wouldn't expect to see that. And so, yeah, breaking down stigma is huge. And then the last two, I'm going to talk about these two together. So 9 is attracting inbound, organic PR and media opportunities. And number 10 is amplifying your own events and your own sort of owned media and your own, your happenings, your own stuff that's happening in your organization. So when it comes down to attracting inbound opportunities, organic PR, media placements, things like that, most of us, our missions are well known to a certain extent. We have some level of brand loyalty and recognition, but there's a lot of noise. I'm recording this right around election time. There is a lot of noise. And so showing up consistently on LinkedIn not only helps you stay top of mind with the media, but even more importantly, even more so, it helps you stay top of mind with peers who can refer you to opportunities, not just traditional media, but also things like podcasts and influencers sharing content about your work, things like that. In fact, I remember back in the day, I once shared a LinkedIn post about the therapy dog who used to support our women back at the organization. And so a lot of people saw that on LinkedIn, and a colleague of mine who I hadn't actually talked to in months, we'd see each other once a year at the big national conference. She saw the post and said, "You've got to talk to my friend. She has a podcast about this kind of thing." And they did a whole episode about our program, and it was a big deal. So it's just another way to get in front of decision makers and show up as that go-to voice. And then finally, you have events and happenings all the time, right? Convenings, you're launching stuff. You have milestone anniversaries, ribbon cuttings. And yes, of course, you can share about them as a LinkedIn post, but you can also create LinkedIn events and invite people. So let's say you're having an in-person launch of fill in the blank, whatever. Create a LinkedIn event. Invite people using that LinkedIn event, because as they accept, it puts that event on their calendar and also spreads the word onto other people's feeds. So use it as an add-on to your existing marketing strategy for these existing events and get the people outside of your immediate lists intrigued. Okay. So that's 10 ways, a nice round, even number, 10 ways you can strategically use LinkedIn. And as you start thinking ahead to 2025, I want you to remember to use LinkedIn to amplify your work in the world. So if we're not already connected, reach out and connect with me, because I can't wait to see you on there as you keep working towards your mission. Okay, so you've heard from us. Now I want to hear from you. Leaving a review helps us so much in growing our reach and supporting more folks with this podcast. And even better, I would love for you to send me a note on LinkedIn with your takeaways from this episode. I cherish and respond to every message, so I can't wait to hear from you. And if you want to go even deeper, check out the show notes to take your next step.